Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fourth edition of the 2021 season of C2 Cyber's webinars. I'm very pleased to welcome David Langhorn of North Point Partners and Kieren, Nicolas. I'd like to ask them to both introduce themselves in a minute. The topic of today's webinar is the real world impact of digital risk and how cyber risks can disrupt your business. Kiran, if I can ask you to introduce yourself, please, sir.
Of course, and thank you very much for inviting me. So my name's Kieren Nicolas. I'm, in advance, a very strange person. So I used to be a nuclear ballistic missile submariner, and after doing that for 2 years and spending 4 months underwater, I decided to do something slightly less dangerous. So I went into mine warfare and did that for 5 years. And then after gradually going in more into the intelligence side, I got an award for the Royal Navy, and I was said I'd always be loyal. But then the Norwegian Navy said, we'll offer you 3 times as much. So I moved over and I became a captain lieutenant in the Norwegian Armed Forces, where I set up the cyber warfare division. And then I led 5 warships in standing NATO Maritime Group 1 against pirates in Somalia. After that, I then became head of computer emergency response at the University of Cambridge, which is quite a strange network because it's the biggest digital private network in Europe. It includes the North Pole, South Pole, Singapore, and even CERN. So lots of things and lots of practice because looking after cybersecurity for academics is a bit like herding cats. After doing that, I then moved over to Estonia, where I'm head of cybersecurity for Pipedrive, which is a large CRM. I'm still a lecturer at Cambridge University and Cranfield University in the UK for defence, and occasionally I sleep.
Great, thank you for that. David.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. I started my career with 29 years as a military intelligence officer, specializing in human intelligence. And that's where my interest in the human aspects of cybersecurity and cybercrime come into play. Having left the army, I joined Intercontinental Hotels Group as the Global Director of Protective Intelligence, building and running protective intelligence networks around the globe for the company. I was subsequently promoted to Chief Security Officer of the company, working closely with or against the IT security teams, as it may be. And then subsequently, after 11 years as the CSO, I left the company and joined up with some fellow chief security officers from hospitality groups, and we've formed North Point International, which serves the hospitality sector with security consultancy, but we step a little bit beyond because we are very interested in cybercrime management and being able to help companies align their physical and cyber security capabilities.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, David. The topic under discussion today is cyber risk in real business, in physical business, which is often more of a challenge. And one of the first points I'd like to raise, and we can discuss, is we've seen some rapid digital transformation in the last 18 months. So businesses being essentially forced into it by the nature of the pandemic that swept around the globe, and so companies planning a 5-year or a 10-year transformation to get to a particular digital stance or maturity have done it all in 3 months. And they've all gone home and they've locked down, and businesses that are by legacy more physical in nature, whether it's the hospitality industry or manufacturing or similar, have moved a lot of their information technology and their data into a place where they can access it from anywhere, which brings quite a lot of risk. Things they would have plotted out over 5 years, maybe thought about it a bit more, they did it very quickly. And now I think people are circling back round and thinking, right, if we were going to do this in a more structured way, what do we need to put in place now the pandemic is starting to subside? And David, with your hospitality background, that must be fairly applicable to the hotels and all of the infrastructure and the people that you worked with in your role. Could I just ask you to comment on how you see that industry rapidly transforming and protecting the data, even if they need to start doing more now?
Yeah, I think one of the aspects that would be troubling with regards to COVID is the expansion of home working. And I think many companies, especially in the hospitality industry, which is a consensual industry as opposed to a regulated industry, probably struggled with user discipline, user training of the IT systems. And now, 90% of the corporate workers work from home and will probably remain working from home. Those risks associated with home working really, I think, amplifies the problems and the challenges that the corporate IT security structures and governance struggled with, when it wasn't a home working sort of environment, and integration as well of digital, with vendors and third-party suppliers. They will also, I think, bring new risks because they've experienced the same vulnerabilities probably of home working.
In the same boat. Yeah,
exactly. And the third parties and vendors can bring those risks into your company as well. So it's multi-dimensional new challenges, I think.
No, sure. And Kiran, I know a few Cambridge academics, and their cybersecurity is obviously top line, even when working from home. But you must have experienced some challenges in moving that estate, whether it's the student population or the research or the teaching, solely to remote collaboration and instantly using untrusted devices and home Macs and all the rest of it in a space of weeks. What was the biggest challenge you faced, and how, particularly in the physical sciences, did they continue to interact with experiments being run and things you can't turn off? You mentioned CERN earlier. That must have been a challenge, because that's not something you flick the switch on and go home, is it?
Definitely. The challenge and the transition was sharp. But to be absolutely honest, most of the transition, there's always a good military saying, you never let a good crisis go to waste. So a lot of the lessons that we were learning for when we were migrating across, they just exposed the cracks that we already had. And going on with David's good point, cybersecurity training, for the most part, isn't cybersecurity training, it's lecturing. And it says advice, which is impossible. My personal favorite of don't click links in emails. Well, then none of you would be on the Zoom call. Don't open emails from people you don't know. Then your sales team doesn't do a very good job. So what this actually did is expose what we've all known within the military for a long time, which is bad things happen. The quicker we know about it and the quicker we deal with it, that is what is important. So more openness and more transparency is key. What we kind of do is, if we beat people constantly with the rules, they don't tell us when they've got a mistake. And then it turns a minor incident into a major one. Yeah. This is particularly the case with in the current threat with pretty much most physical is ransomware. And I always like this story because the hero of the story is a gin and tonic. It was at Cambridge University, ransomware was activated, but he turned the machine off and went for a gin and tonic because it was Friday and 4 o'clock. If he kept that
4
machine...
o'clock? Wow.
4 o'clockers.
Working late, okay.
Working late. But if he kept that on, then it would be compromised. So even simple things like turning your machines off, use it as part of your green policy, reporting it, making sure that the communications, the quicker we know, the quicker we can deal with it. And COVID really expanded this. It meant that there was lots more minor incidents.
Sorry to interrupt, I remember we had a period of time where you were invited to change your password every month, and it had to be really long and very hard to guess and all that sort of stuff. And we've walked backwards from that because all you found is that people wrote it down and stuck it under their keyboard because it was too hard and it changed too often. and the complexity and the reuse policies have changed a little bit at the advisor and the government level anyway, so that you can remember it even if it's longer. And I think that's helpful. The rules are starting to accommodate real human beings rather than just IT security people.
Yeah, which is perfect. I mean, I always love 3 monthly changing passwords because it means that I know the organization changes the number at the end of their password every 3 months.
Yeah.
That's
or if you've got a compartment with a row of safes and they're all sequentially numbered, for example, in times gone by. Right, David.
Can I pick up on Kieran's point there? Absolutely, about being honest and open with what's going on, so you can get a true picture of the threat and risk landscape and deal with it, as opposed to emperor's new clothes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time I feel that there are people in the IT, senior people in the IT security world will say to senior management, nothing to see here, everything's all right, there's not a threat. And I was speaking to a senior government cyber person a couple of years ago, and we were talking about CISOs. And he said, and it stuck with me, if your CISO isn't telling your CEO or senior management about a problem every week, your CISO's not doing his job properly.
Yeah, it's not got visibility. So we used to have amnesty packages and policies in other places, and that could be as simple as ammunition, but also bad practices and reporting things. Do you see the successful use of confidential or anonymous reporting lines and so on, email addresses where you can write down things that you don't like, that you're not sure about because you're not an IT expert, but you think this is probably needs some attention? We don't see enough of that when it comes to the people behavior on the ground.
I agree. They work very, very well when implemented, but you've, as you rightly said, you've got to show the leadership at the top. There's a bit of a psychological trait for this as well, which is why when you do the process of this, you've got to be quite careful. The trait in this is called labeling theory. And ironically, we all know what this is. If anyone has ever had a 13-year-old boy, if you call him an idiot, he will be an idiot. They comply. And we do this with users. If we call them idiots and if we tell them off, they will actually get worse. And the reason that this can be quite interesting now with testing is because there's such emphasis on making sure we get good metrics, that when we do phishing training, we can sometimes try and phish our employees and damage the trust between IT security. So the way you do it is key. And there was one company who will remain nameless in December who did this very badly by telling everybody that they had not got their Christmas bonuses, and then 10 minutes later spear phishing them to do phishing training to say, you are an exception, click here to get your bonus. And then when they clicked it, it said it was a phishing link and this has been reported to your line manager.
Okay.
How to completely destroy trust in your computer emergency response team in an instant.
Not great for retention either, arguably. I imagine it's a bit of a personnel shortfall shortly after Christmas.
Just a little, yeah. I think the printer might have been too busy with printing resumes.
Yeah.
But this, I'm not saying don't do it, but the way that you do it needs to be positive reinforcement, not negative. Because exactly as you say, it goes with the anonymous reporting. The best way I've ever seen this was at Cambridge, of where if you reported something, they would send you a sweet or a gift voucher to say thank you for doing it. So
did you have a sort of loyalty program, so you don't get a gift voucher every week?
Yes, yeah.
You know these academics. So David, in the physical environment, a lot of the places that you work with, support, consult with, must have locked down, gone home, started using personal IT or corporate machines in home, but had to interface with the real world. So you've got physical security apparatus that's got an IP address, and you've got machinery and catering and vending machines, all this stuff in the hotel complexes that interacts with your customer base and is connected to the internet or would have been shortly after they plugged it together. Have you seen any issues where all of this stuff's been connected to the internet without too much thought, simply because of the pandemic, and now they've got to go back round and secure it all, put it behind fences and whatnot?
To be honest with you, I haven't really seen that much, because, to be truthful, in the hospitality sector, and you've got to understand that the hospitality sector has got a huge amount of data, a lot more than the person on the Clapham omnibus would realise. So, for instance, if you're a hotel group with 7,000 rooms, 7,000 hotels, each of 200 rooms, each time somebody checks in, you're collecting data on the two people maybe that are in the room. So over the time, a massive amount of data is collected. When you look at loyalty programs, some hotel companies claim 50 million members, 60 million members. And so it is a real potential target and is a target for not only serious and organised crime, but also state actors, because the amount of personal. And so really the concentration has been on protecting those core data sources. And to be quite honest with you, the IP, the Internet of Things, as it reaches out into hotels, is quite peripheral when it comes to prioritization, because everybody's scrabbling to protect the golden goose. And also it's worth remembering that hotels within hotel groups are actually individual businesses, which are largely not actually owned by the corporate entity.
Right, so a franchise model. Okay.
Franchise and even managed models. Right. And so the big problem that the hotel groups face in this regard is what is in scope of the central IT security team. Yeah. Because if an owner, for instance, owns a Hilton, owns a IG, Hyatt, and what have you, within his portfolio, you can be pretty sure that his own IT system will link all those corporate IT systems together in one way or the other. Right. Okay. And so it is very, very difficult to effectively describe the scope of the risks that you're actually accountable for to manage. And to be quite honest with you, the IT of things in hotels and what have you really floats on the periphery of that, and is really the responsibility of the owning company by and large. Right. Okay. Interesting. So the next one in my list is, how do you bound and organize such a complex model? So if you were approaching this and you'd been in the physical environment, you're a factory, a manufacturing installations aware, and all of a sudden everything that isn't critical in terms of people on the ground, they're no longer working in the office upstairs, they're all at home. How do you make sure that they can continue to do that and integrate those, where presumably the internet, rather than private wires, is going to be the thing in the middle? Is that for me or for Kieren? Well, let's ask Kieren. Now I fixed my chair.
With great difficulty. And to kind of, it actually leads on a little bit of what you were saying there, David. When you're first doing anything, you need to know what you actually have. And when it comes to the scope, this is where a number of large organizations have been caught out, because you kind of fight the scenario a little bit. When it comes to the scope, you want to pass your compliance. So you reduce the scope to a point of where it is absolutely impossible, to actually get any meaningful data out of it. Don't do compliance to be compliant. Do compliance to find out what's wrong and then fix it. And for the big side, which most organizations need to change, if you are doing ISO or NIST or anything, the scope now includes remote working. You've got to know how everybody works. And the only way you can do it is actually consulting, and not either internally or externally, but actually ask your staff what they're doing. And a cracking example of this, when I was at Cambridge, we banned Dropbox. So I phone up Dropbox and say, can you tell us how many accounts we actually have at Cambridge? And it was 26,000. You can ban it all we want. They needed it for their job and to do research. So they are going to use the tool. So make sure that the tools that you're providing, they're easy to use. They actually work. It's what the employees want, and document it.
Right.
I would love to say a lovely cybersecurity magic box is the thing to do, or a tool, but it isn't. It's actually knowing what you have. That once you've got that grasp, you can then come up with a plan. It's really, because CISOs have such a, they're always having a problem. It can be very easy to just go, well, we'll buy this tool for a solution, or just to get a quick win. The problem is there are no quick wins in cybersecurity. You really do have to do a strategic plan.
A program. Yeah.
Can I add to that? Absolutely, Kieren. From the magic box, the number of times that I've been to IT security teams with human intelligence saying, look, we've found indicators of compromise. We've identified these people that are working and planning on, for instance, breaching loyalty programs to steal points or data. Whenever we've managed to get together around a table with senior management to discuss it, the old magic box was the first defense. Oh, we've got no reason to worry about that because we employ X, Y, and Z. And the senior management, perhaps being not particularly au fait with the IT world and more than happy to delegate it to the CISO and just keep me out of the newspapers. But it just seems that, we employ such and such, and that will deal with it all. So
by spending that money, it's all gone. Yeah. Okay. So another question there. In some of the physical environments, physical businesses in Cambridge, you've got quite a high turnover of population on an annual basis, I guess, with the students and researchers and whatnot. And the same thing in hospitality, from memory of when I used to work in there. That interim population comes with its own attendant risks. Even if an interim individual or a temporary researcher or similar can't do their job without access to systems and email and payroll and everything else, how does a company that has never had to do this before quickly put in place programs to support interim workforces where you're hiring people you may never have met? Previously, they would have sat in the office with you, and now they're at home. And you're issuing them with lots of accounts and accesses and privileges and things, but you never met them before. There's a bit of a step change in how you train the behaviors and train the adherence to the things that keep you safe. How do you do that? It's quite a big topic in and of itself, but the interim market's getting bigger. The gig economy is here, and then COVID showed up. So they're all still at home. So David, can I ask you to tackle that one first for me?
Yeah, very, very tricky indeed. I mean, when you're employing people on a longer term basis, you can do background checks, you've got access to give them training and experience and building the trust. But with the interim workers, that's a huge problem, because are they going to be loyal to your company? They're only there, what are their motivations? From the human perspective, this temporary employment really gives great opportunities for criminals to insert threat actors into your system, because you can't do the background checks, you haven't got the supervision that could perhaps detect strange behaviors in the office, and so it is an absolute real challenge. I suppose working on the basic principles, because the principles of physical security, detect, deter, respond, blah blah, actually apply to the cyber world. And so really it's about being very careful who and what you give that person access to. and minimize that access. And if that person needs access to really sensitive data or systems that could cripple your whole business, then you'd say you wouldn't employ, transient workers in that regard. And I think that's a real battle, because on one side you've got HR and you've got the finance officers trying to cut down on headcount, trying to cut down on fixed costs. And on the other side, you've got the security people saying, well, this person is going to have access to all this sensible and sensitive and critical information. It really does need to be somebody who we can oversee and control. Control is probably the wrong word, but
yeah, I agree. It came back to something we were talking about before, Kiran, with a responsibility to share. So need to know about containing what that person knows, particularly in interim, or if they're just dealing with a specific system. But then if you tie one hand behind their back by not sharing enough information, you don't get the result you want, and you get back around the loop and it costs more money. So it's quite a fine balance, I think.
I completely
Kiran,
agree.
What do you think?
Completely agree. But one thing that I found quite interesting with talking to organizations and advising them is, to be honest, the onboarding process, it's accelerated, but it's not that bad compared to offboarding. The process of when somebody leaves, it's become very disjointed now, because traditionally they were in the office, they would leave and you revoke the accounts. The amount of times you actually go through data and say, these are 70 accounts, these no longer work here, they're still active. And the big problem is because most people, we have hundreds of tools for different apps, different things, and it's a lot of work. Setting them up is easy.
It's actually, it's one of the biggest areas for us, because and we've had to stand a separate team up to look at identity and access management for onboarding and offboarding, and we've found accounts that belong to deceased employees that are still in use by their replacement over decades. Because nobody's needed to change it. And now all of a sudden they've plugged all of that stuff into the internet. It becomes a bit more of a problem. And the offboarding piece is really interesting. We worked for a company once where they didn't even take back the company car, let alone laptops and phones. And so people would sign for a new company car knowing that in 90 days time they were going to retire. So they get a new one. And that's an extreme example. But if you never meet these people, how do they get access in the first place? So where do you ship endpoints and device and laptops and phones and so on? And B, how do you get them back from these people where they're not inclined, after they've passed the company with your organization, to walk to the post office and post it back in a form that's going to survive? So there's quite a lot of activity in remote data management, making sure it stays safe, even in transit and all that side of the business. And for us at C2, that's actually a growth area. So IAM is one of the bigger areas for us in making sure that happens in a responsible way. Gents, we've actually got some questions in, if I might ask. The first one was about magic boxes, which means I'm going to ask Kiran to answer the question, because David called out the magic box. So Kiran, if there is no magic box and it's constantly about upgrading with hundreds of small actions and lots of smaller vendors and third parties accessing your data, what are the best ways of staying up to date with current best practice? So how do you stay ahead of the game?
If you do everything well, and if you use all of the best practices in the world, you will be one step behind the hacker. Unfortunately, it's a numbers game. If I have 50,000 vulnerabilities I need to patch, a hacker only needs one of them. And it's always going to be on the back foot. However, it's better to be one step behind than 10, which is what we are trying to aim for. And if I had to go and buy any particular thing immediately from that would push me most in the right direction, it's threat intelligence. And threat intelligence is your friend. But I will also give that the caveat. Cybersecurity is a little bit like AI, blockchain, threat intelligence. Everybody's doing it. Everybody likes to bolt it on.
Buzzword bingo, yeah.
Yeah, and most of the time, you don't get threat intelligence, you get threat data. and threat data is pointless. If you haven't processed it and turned it into information, useless. And there are quite a few of them that confuse what intelligence really is. Intelligence is some information that you've got that can help drive you to be more secure, to work out what attackers are doing.
You can action it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a list. So what I would generally suggest if you are looking for vendors for doing this is get them to tell you at the start, do a trial and see what they've got. If they're just telling you vulnerability data, bin them straight away. Don't use them.
Okay.
They've got to be from a more proactive response.
Proper TI. Okay. David.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look, well, all security is like playing a piano. You play different notes at different times. The more notes that you've got, the better tune, the better protection that you have. And sort of tapping away on one note all the time, doesn't and won't give you a tune. I think it goes back to having an integrated security strategy that sort of zips down the organization and going beyond the bounds of cyber systems. It's about, and I would say this, of course, it's about understanding who the threat actors are, what their capabilities are, what their intentions are, the basics of security intelligence. And so it's getting a suite of different approaches and integrating them together to basically play the tune that you want to hear with regards to your system and cybersecurity.
Okay. No.
Following on that, as just one quote that kind of sets the scene. We always talk about threat actors from nation states, and we always talk about criminals. But the reality is really simple. Give me a state actor from China anytime over an ex-girlfriend. It's the motive and the drive and the information. So I completely agree with you, David. The best penetration tests I've ever done have actually not been with cybersecurity experts. They've been with accountants and lawyers and people who can process hack, understand how to do it and motivate them. And you get a lot of information from actually just testing it yourself, getting different departments in your own organization to say, how would you abuse this?
Absolutely. And the other aspect to that is, once again, from my physical side, I wouldn't even bother going to crime as a service or trying to hack or what have you. I would just find out where people from that company were drinking and socializing, especially at times of people being made redundant or disaffected with the company, and basically just go and chat them up, buy them a drink, and then send them into the company behind the wall with free access to everything that's behind the wall. And they can commit actions, positive actions, or just by omissions. It can open to the door to the people waiting to come in from the wall. So exploiting human vulnerabilities is absolutely the way that I, as a physical man, that I would go about breaching cyber systems. Use of humans to do it, not technical solutions or other things like that.
So that leads me on to my next question, which is many different suppliers and vendors. We've got lots of smaller ones. You've got primes that sometimes have fourth and fifth parties hiding behind them as the third party. So you've actually got quite a vendor chain to deal with, a lot of which people used to physically meet or they would interview. And now all of a sudden you're changing vendors and you're moving between cloud suppliers and cloud services without ever actually meeting them. It's a credit card payment away. And then you upload all your data into the thing, but you've not really assessed them at all. How do you build a holistic end-to-end process for validating that? And that includes the humans, that includes the sales process. And I can probably wrap in, as an example, the third question, which is how do you actually evaluate threat intelligence companies? So Kiran, this has come in since your comment about TI. If it's just data, then you have to employ your own analysts, and that's a bit pointless. What you really want is threat intelligence, which is actionable. So it's come from an analyst and they can tell you what you need to do or why at least you need to do it. They can give it a scale. So that's my scenario. And the question is, how do you evaluate those vendors? So what process can you put them through to make sure they're safe?
Well, for the first question, in terms of the processes, is especially that most of them do have very good compliance tools, but just remember that they're also probably trying to play the compliance game as well. So is a recommendation, always see if they are following the NIST standard, but there's a really simple way that I actually filter out about 95% of vendors. And really, really simple. And it's looking for something called a security.txt or an RFC 2350. Now, I know this is very technical, geeky words, but basically, it's a text file that you have on your website that says, in the event of an emergency, this is who you contact. It's the 999 of cybersecurity. It is the first level of maturity that you should have. If you don't have that, I have to, say if I find some vulnerabilities, I have to phone you up, I have to go through your sales desk, I have to find a way of doing it, and then I email you, and it's unsecure because I've just emailed you a load of threat data.
Yeah.
In just looking, if you just ask the one question of, do you have an RFC 2350 or security.txt, and can you find it, don't hire them, because they're not actually getting threat data. And for yourself, if you want to get loads of free intelligence, make sure you stick that on your own website. Because then our fellow intelligence companies, organizations, and states know exactly where to send it to.
Yeah.
But in terms of how to turn threat intelligence into data, I'm going to, since you're a fellow Navy person as well, Jonathan, this is very naturally to us, because for every day we would have our command, aim, and priorities. And you need that in order to turn your threat data into intelligence. What is the purpose of your organization? What are you trying to do? And what is important to you? And this part is what's generally missing in most of our threat data.
Right.
If you can have a critical vulnerability of 10, 10, 10, and that machine is absolutely vulnerable. If it doesn't do anything and it's got no data on it, you do not need to focus your attention there at all. The vulnerability that might be 2 or 3, but as David said, it's your crown jewels, and this is where all of the data is. Yeah, that's where you need to focus your attention. And the only way you can do that is by having a clear direction from your senior information officer or your CEO of what is critical. And once you identify that criticality, to then look at the data and say, what would the impact be if this was exploited? It's unfortunately a lot of hard work. But if you just have a threat intelligence expert that doesn't know that, you just get more data. That's it.
Yeah, you just get a deluge of data. And David, how did you triage things like that in the protective intelligence domain when you were in the hospitality industry directly? So you must have had quite a lot of reporting coming in that you'd need to categorize for reliability and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we'd put it through the accepted intelligence processes. Clear direction to start with, which speaks to Kieran's last point. And I think with that direction aspect, I think life would be a lot easier if senior management outside of cybersecurity and IT security had more knowledge, which empowered them to be able to interact with their cybersecurity people and feel empowered to give direction. And then it would, rather than saying, well, this is all a bit too difficult for me, I've got a CISO, you go away and just come back and tell me that everything's all right and I can sleep all right. But if you've got a CEO or senior management that have a basic understanding, who can actively engage and prod and challenge, then that would be a huge step change in the way that that cybersecurity teams work, because often they work in a silo, going round their own hamster wheel without that sort of direction and oversight, perhaps.
We actually see quite a few places where they've appointed an information security person or a secondary role or a CISO, and with sincere regret, they didn't get a budget. So the limit of the expense incurred by the organisation is the CISO, who's essentially the staked goat to be sacrificed if there's a breach. And drawing the interest of the business divisions is harder than it should be in protecting the information that they use for making things or communicating with customers or whatever. So there's a lot of change to happen, I think.
Yeah, and it's because it's seen as a dark art, and people don't want to engage with it because they don't want to seem silly or stupid.
Yeah. Well, we've sort of caused half of that ourselves with all the jargon that we bring to this. And as 3 military people, we used to have the jargon bus just to get our own jobs done. But may I ask, we've got a couple of minutes left, gents. And so what I was hoping to finish off with is to ask both of you, what are the top 3 things that you would do if you were in a physical industry? So you run a factory or you run a hotel or similar. What are the first 3 things you would do or ask to ensure they're already happening with all of the transformation that's accelerated over the last 18 months? What are the 3 things you would do not to get caught out? Kiran, can I start with you?
Yep. First 3 things are training, and by training, don't worry too much about just the cybersecurity awareness training, but more importantly, training of what to do when it goes wrong.
Okay.
Activate your emergency procedures, activate your crisis management team, and see if they actually work.
Okay.
There's a good example where they tried this with Cobra during the COVID crisis, and it turned out there were 2 versions of the manual. One of them said turn up in Whitehall, and the other one said turn up in Manchester.
Yeah.
And again, only a small difference, but then you had 2 teams turning up in 2 different locations. So practice. The second one, know your assets, information asset register, and physically and information. Definitely, that is essential.
Can I'd add to that? Sorry to interrupt, because I know I asked, but not just confidentiality. So integrity and availability to be tested as well. So out of that CIA triad, it's all very well knowing it's secure, it's encrypted, but if you can't get hold of it because your only data center caught fire, you don't have a business anymore. So it's one of my own hobby horses. Yeah,
definitely. To be honest, the only reason I think that most cybersecurity people focus mainly on it's a big C, little a, that I've always said. But the reason that most cybersecurity people focus on the C is because it's a lot easier to deal with than the I and the A. Right. So I completely agree with you. And when you do these practices, it's vital that, be honest, availability is probably the most important thing. If your company can't access it, it doesn't exist. So
we looked at Fastly 2 weeks ago. So we've got 2 minutes left. Had you finished, or did I talk over you?
The final point is something that I'm very refreshing to hear today. Security is security. It isn't cybersecurity. It is security. And we've done this wrong for years, as we mentioned earlier. But cyber warfare, we're doing it in the UK, where we have air, land, sea, space, cyber. Cyber is not a different planet. It's connected into everything. And we learned this throughout the military because that's what electronic warfare was at the start, until it became an integral part in all of the fields. We're learning now in cybersecurity that it's slowly but surely going from cybersecurity to security. It is the security of your whole organization. So when you are doing these meetings and everything within your company, open it up. It's not the CISO's problem, it's your problem.
Thank you. David?
I'd take it as an opportunity to almost rip it up and start again, to quote an 80s pop group. It is really an opportunity to integrate cybersecurity with physical security and probably do away with those names and come up with enterprise defense or something like that, with both sides working to the same plan, with a shared budget, with the same strategy and an integrated project. And it's got to happen. Otherwise, we're going to go round and round the same loop and the same problems that we've had for years.
No, thank you very much. And from my side, I'd just like to extend my thanks for your time today in discussing these. I think this is one of our liveliest, and we've got lots more to talk about, but unfortunately we're out of time. So if anybody would like to get in touch and I can connect you to our speakers today, delighted to do so. We'll put the data on our web portal. Otherwise, in 2 weeks, I will see you for our next webinar, and that's on critical national infrastructure. So we'll be talking about water and colonial pipelines and all sorts of good things there. I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
you.
Goodbye.